welcome back to Room 237, back with another review. Now, sometime over the past week, I went through all of the I Spit on Your Grave films, and I reviewed those, consisting of the 1970 original, the remake, the sequel to the remake, and the direct sequel to the remake. And I said there was one more left that came out since then, 2019. I wasn't sure when I was going to get to it because I didn't own it and I hadn't seen it. But I had some time today, so I decided what the hell, and I went and picked it up. So now I can officially wrap up my reviews of the I Spit on Your Grave series with 2019's direct sequel to the original, I Spit on Your Grave, Deja Vu. Now, this was written and directed by Miyazaki, the writer and director of the original film. I believe the only other film he directed since I Spit on Your Grave was one called Don't Mess With My Sister, sometime in the 80s. So, he hadn't directed anything in some time, but he did serve as an executive producer on all three in the reboot series. And this one kind of follows a trend that some direct sequels have been doing since then, and even a little bit before this, like Halloween 2018 or Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022, where it brings back the heroine of the original film, whether it's the original actress or not. In this case, it is. Camille Keaton returns as Jennifer Hills, and ends up in a similar situation as the original film. And even though it is a sequel, it very much does kind of feel like a remake. And I have very mixed feelings on this. This is probably the one that I'm the most torn over as far as my opinion. The original film, I do enjoy. I do think that's a cult classic. There's some technical aspects about that film that I really enjoy. You can go watch my review for that. You can go watch my review for all these films. The remake I thought was okay for what it was. It felt like it went a little too much into like Saw territory to really kind of have the impact that the original did. I Spit on Your Grave 2, I did not like at all. I thought that was a very poor film. 3, I thought was a decent way to go about a sequel with the character from the remake and sort of show what happens with, the aftermath and how someone like that might go about life and how to do a sequel that way. Here, there are some things I like about it, but then there were some things that just made this a chore to sit through, which I'll get to. So as I said, written and directed by Miyazaki. Returning is Camille Keaton. Also, Jamie Bernadette plays her daughter, Christy. We got Maria Olsen, who was in movies like, she was in one of the Paranormal Activities. She was in Lords of Salem. She's been in quite a few horror movies, especially of like the 2010s. Miyazaki himself makes an appearance, uncredited appearance, as a priest. His two kids, Tammy and Terry, which Terry served as a producer on this. They played Johnny's kids in the original. They come back for a scene at the end of this film. The cinematography was by, I hope I pronounced this correctly, Pedia Radinkovic, and Terry Zarchi served as the editor. There's no one credited with a score like the original. There is no score. But I swore there were some parts with music. I mean, it sounded, I guess it's more sound effects, like more of a sound design, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. For example, there's this older couple that shows up with this old beaten up truck. It either sounds like it's part of the truck or some sort of like drum beat that's behind it, which I thought was a nice touch. So if the score is more sound effects, that's a really I think that's something that worked, but there's no one credited with the score. Also appearing, you have Jonathan Pesci and Jeremy Ferdman, along with Jim Tabare, who I know was in one of the Harry Potters. I think he was in Last Comic Standing. And then Holgi Forrester, Roy Allen III, Alexandra Kenworthy. Uh, does it? I guess filming began in 2015, but it was in post production for over 3 years. So I'm not sure what the holdup for post production was. But the budget, it doesn't even say what the budget is. But anyway, so right off the bat, probably the biggest thing that made this a chore to sit through, and I'm sure many other people that watch this feel the same, is the running time. This movie sits at 2 hours and 28 minutes. Now, normally that's not an issue with me. I mean, some of my favorite movies of all time, even outside horror. I mean, that's about how long The Shining is. The Shining's 2 hours, 22 minutes. But some of my favorite movies, Goodfellas is, I think, 3 minutes longer than that. There Will Be Blood. Uh, Casino is 3 hours long. Once Upon a Time in America, not the Tarantino film, the one with Robert De Niro. The director's cut's over 4 hours. So I mean, I can watch longer films. This just doesn't have an engrossing story, and there is a lot of fat that can be trimmed off of this, especially a lot of exposition or a lot of flashbacks or a lot of characters talking about nothing, almost in like a Tarantino type way, talking about nothing, but it's not interesting at all. This easily could have been 90 to 100 minutes, easily. I'm not quite sure why they went with that. In fact, the actual main plot where it's just Christie, that comes in well over an hour into the film, probably between an hour 10, hour 20 minutes is when, it becomes just her story. And then the revenge portion comes in about an hour and a half into it. So it does feel slow paced. Another thing that makes this a chore is, other than Keaton's performance, some of Bernadette's performance, not all of her was great. Some of it was. I'll even give the first few scenes with Maria Olsen, like the scene when they're initially abducted and in the van. I thought some of the monologues that Maria Olsen goes on was well done. But shortly after that, she, along with almost the rest of the cast, becomes a fucking cartoon character. Everyone is so over the top. I guess Jeremy Ferdman, who plays Scotty, was probably the most normal out of the group of baddies. As was Roy Allen. I guess he wasn't too bad either. But everyone else, Maria Olsen, Jim Tavare to an extent, Jonathan Pesci was the worst. He was the absolute worst part of this movie. This crackhead Rob Zombie looking guy. He every scene he was in was tough to get through. And Holgi Forrester, they are all over the top cartoon characters. Now, I don't know if they were just, that's the direction they were given, if they're trying to play over the top backwoods hicks, or it almost felt like towards the beginning, I thought they were just kind of paying homage to, by going over the top, paying homage by going over the top to like the 70s exploitation, grindhouse, bad acting, which I guess could still be the case. But I mean, this fucking guy, this Jonathan PC guy who plays Kevin, which first of all, okay, so let me get the story out of the way. Which another thing is the story, because the original I Spit on Your Grave is one of the most straightforward films ever. I mean, you can literally say the genre, rate revenge, and you know what the movie's about. There's nothing else to that movie. Very straightforward. Here, there's a lot other plot points. It even throws in a couple twists at the end and turns that I don't know if it really needed. So it definitely doesn't follow the straightforward formula, even though a lot of the plot points and even dialogue within the same scenarios, straight ripoffs of the original. Which maybe that's the point since it's called Deja Vu, but it's supposed to be more of a sequel than it is a remake. But so it's been 40 years since the original, both in real time and uh, in this. Camille Keaton back as Jennifer Hills. She's written a book called I Spit on Their Graves about her attack and her revenge and how she was acquitted. She was tried in New York and all charges were dropped. She's this best-selling author now. Her daughter Christy is apparently the highest paid model in the world. Everyone knows who she is. They, for whatever reason, they're back in the town that the original film occurred in. And the families of Jennifer Hills' victims find out. They've had this 40-year grudge against them. So Maria Olsen plays Becky, who was Johnny's wife. Jonathan PC plays Kevin, who was Stanley's brother. Jeremy Ferdman plays Scotty, who was Andy's cousin. And then this Woody Harrelson looking guy who has a severe stutter and mostly just grunts or makes noises. He's Matthew's father. They all get together. They abduct the two of them. And they have a plan to get their revenge. And that's basically the movie. I mean, one thing leads to another. And then eventually it just becomes her story. But so you have the family members. And I don't even think this was filmed in the same area because Becky still works at the gas station that Johnny worked at or owned. It's called Johnny Station. But in the original film, it was like this lone station on a back road. Now that it's like sort of a main back road, but with like a strip of buildings across the street. So I don't know if it was filmed in the same area. And the buildings look run down, like older than 40 years old. Also, this guy that's supposed to be Andy's younger cousin says, I looked up to Andy. He was like an older brother to me. But Andy was killed 40 years ago, and this guy barely looks like he's in his mid-30s. So, kind of Texas Chainsaw 3D there with the timeline a little bit. Also, you get some other people like the old couple in the truck. They're Johnny's parents, which his dad is this Bible verse spouting old man, and his wife, Johnny's mother, is just this little petite old woman that's constantly guzzling off a whiskey pint. And her acting is so over the top too. I mean, she reminded me of like an Una O'Connor character from the 30s Universal Monsters films. Just like yelling and doing like weird like facial expressions. Like, buried next to your father's grave. Like, but yeah, the worst is Stanley's brother Kevin, Jonathan PC, because he is just, he's got that intense, like we've seen in a lot of movies, especially older ones, like they're from New York. They think they're better than all of us. They think they're better. And but like when he's out of the van and he's just on his foot, he reminds me of the ex leper on Life of Brian. Oh, he's always like hopping around and like right up against people's back and like doing this with his head a lot. They at first they're gonna say she's innocent, so they just bring Jennifer to Matthew's dad's house, where they have a noose set up and they have her at gunpoint. But they have her standing there, and that guy Kevin, he goes and gets like this novelty blade. It's like this round blade that's like shaped like flames. And this is kind of what made me think they're going for like the 70s bad grindhouse acting. Because some of the shots look that way. Like he's kind of doing his thing, like he's kind of dancing around here, kind of going in and out, being like, "Can I cut her? Can I cut her?" He's like holding this in front of him, in front of his face, looking to it, going, "Oh." And it's like this shaky kind of handheld looking thing, like as the camera follows him. It has a grindhouse look to it as well. But eventually, and another thing is this movie just keeps going because every time a character gets a gun, they don't use it. Like Camille Keaton eventually outsmarts all four of them. Gets a pistol, is able to get away, but she doesn't kill any of them. So then her and Camille Keaton get separated. Keaton Hills. I was going to say Jennifer Hills. She finds her way to a church where the priest is playing the organ inside. That's the cameo by Zarchi. Eventually, Becky finds her, pulls up, holds her at knife point, is like, here's, something about, this is for Johnny, or, I want you to beg. I want you to beg for your life, like make Johnny roll over in his grave. I do like the line where she says, like, I spit on Johnny's grave. And she just slits her throat, but she keeps going until Jennifer Hills is decapitated. I have mixed feelings about that. Taking this sort of, not really iconic, but in the world of exploitation film, I guess iconic character, heroine, and just killing her off in the first act. So we can follow her daughter essentially go through the same shit that she did in the original. She finds her. And, eventually she's found by the group. She's knocked out. She's raped by Kevin. And then even Becky wants to get in on that. She attempts to rape her. But then Matthew's dad gets really mad. He's kind of a big brute. Kicks and pushes everyone off of her, like helps her away. And there is a lot of flashbacks. Like the first time Jennifer Hills picks up a pistol and looks at it, we get the flashback to when she picked it up out of the drawer for the first time. The next day, when Matthew's dad is at his house, he looks at the noose they were going to hang Jennifer Hills with, and he has a flashback to Matthew's death. There's this other woman on a bicycle with a horn. It's got a Joker card for a clicker. That's Matthew's grandmother that just rides around town. And the biggest thing about I Spit on Your Grave, other than the rape, which she's raped by only Kevin starts to by Becky, but then Matthew's dad stops it. But then eventually, the only real revenge she gets would be on Kevin and Scotty. She's left for dead out in the woods. She finds some clothes. First place she goes is Matthew's dad's place, where she stabs him in the back with a hand scythe, then shoots him. Eventually, because they're all supposed to be hunting her down, you get this long conversation between Kevin and Scotty in Scotty's van. And it's like this up close of Kevin's face where he's talking about going to New York. It's like, because I'm going to go there. I'm going to be somebody. Because nobody knows nobody unless you're somebody. Yeah, the dialogue's pretty terrible in this. Like, I'm going to go there. I'm going to be somebody. And he keeps going, yeah. He's so, like, so over the top and really, like, annoying to watch. Up until Christy shows up. That's when he gets kind of calm. And of course, she has a pistol. She makes him strip. She even says the same thing that Jennifer said to Johnny, like, boots, shorts. And he blames it on Scotty. He even says, Scotty's the one that raped you. I didn't even want to do all that. She starts to feel sympathetic, even to the point where he puts his hand on the pistol and she takes his hand off. But then she starts giving him a hand job. Scotty's up in his van listening to tribal music and doing this weird dance to it. And again, this is exactly the same as Johnny's death. Because first he's still wearing his shirt that's covered his junk. You see her put the pistol there. But then Scotty yells something, so she puts it back here. She grabs a busted bottle. And then, Kevin's just standing there, like, thrusting his whole body, being like, yeah. And she stabs him, I think, twice, right in the crotch. I don't think she fully castrates him, but I guess she just mutilates the hell out of him. He doesn't even feel it. It's not like in the original film where the knife was so sharp that potentially you could not feel it. So she backs away and he's still standing there going like, yeah. And then when the blood starts spurting out, that's when he realizes what's going on. And he even says, it's so good it hurts. He says, oh my God, what have you done to me? Or look what you've done to me. Keep screaming that it won't stop bleeding. Then Scotty comes down. She shoots him right in the dick and or balls as well. But then he stands there. He's like, why would you do that? All I have is a knife. Like, he just stands there like he's fine. But then she gets him down on the ground and shoves the pistol up his ass and fires. Which then comes out his forehead. Which isn't possible. Because he's laying down. She shoved it up his ass, but he's like lifted his head up to kind of like look behind him. So that's not possible. And then eventually she gets help from Johnny's parents. Of course, Johnny's mother is over the top, annoying. Not as bad as Kevin, but still pretty bad. They all gang up on Becky, with the killing blow being she breaks a whiskey bottle over Becky's head, which I do like the up close shot of Becky's face as she kind of looks up at the sky before she dies. I like the bloodshot eyes, the blood and whiskey running down. She's got these really big teeth that are all blood soaked. I just thought it was a decent looking shot. because they also hid Jennifer's body, and she wants to know where it is so she can bring it back to New York. And here's one twist where they say, Johnny's mother says, "We can show you where they hid your mother's body. It's right next to your father's grave." Which earlier, when they all meet up with her or like right after Kevin rapes her, then Becky shows up. They're talking about her looks, like, "Oh, you're pretty, but I don't see much of your mother in you." And then someone says, "Oh, I see a lot of Matthew in her." That Becky kind of takes offense to that. So I think it's obvious which one they're going to say is her father. So they bring her to the cemetery. They show her that, her mother's body's wrapped in a white sheet that says "the bitch." And then they point to her father's grave where there's these black crosses for each of the four guys with a picture of them on it. And just like any other movie, the pictures are stills from the original film. Like the one on Matthew's cross is the close-up when he's raping Jennifer. Like that up close, like, face. So they point to Johnny's. And they acknowledge that granddaughter, grandparents. And they offer help. They're going to give her their truck to bring the body back. And then when they go to help her, they just push her right in the hole. Matthew's grandmother then comes up, and while Johnny's dad is giving this prayer, both grandmothers are like hitting her with a shovel, throwing dirt on her until she seemingly dies. Then they go to leave. But she's able to climb out, and she uses it's a square shovel to like slit the throat of Matthew's grandmother, and then to like gut the stomach of Johnny's mother. Johnny's dad begs, just go ahead and shoot me, but she's like, "Nope, you're gonna keep your promise first," which they get Jennifer's body out, throw it in the truck. Then he begs for death. And they keep saying that she's like the child of Satan, and that she's spawned from the seed of evil. But just so when he says, my life is essentially pointless now because my wife is dead, just go ahead and, kill me. She agrees to let him live, but then he just pulls out a pistol and shoots himself anyway. So he could have done something. Like, nobody in this movie hears anything. Nobody in the very fancy hotel where Jennifer and Christy are in the very beginning. In the parking lot, no one hears them screaming. The priest doesn't hear anyone screaming when Jennifer's being killed outside the church. Scotty doesn't hear Kevin screaming and being, bleeding out. And then Johnny's dad doesn't hear anything over his Bible verse spouting, while both the grandmothers are being killed on foot right behind him. But again, there's like a lot of scenes where someone has a gun and they just don't use it, so it just drags the film out more. So then he commits suicide, and then she just goes to the church to ask for forgiveness. And then, for whatever reason, she just picks up the cross, lays it on the floor. And then we get this end scene where a car pulls up to the gas station, which is Tammy and Terry Zarchi, the writer-director's real-life children, but also Johnny's children. They were also his children in the original film. They show up. They're looking for Becky. They can't find her. And then Christy just drives by in their grandparents' truck. She's covered in blood. She puts on Becky's hat, which I think was Johnny's hat in the original film. And they're just like, well, that was odd. And then just cut to black, and the end credits roll over that sound that I mentioned earlier, where it sounds kind of like a drum beat, but could just be like the exhaust for the truck, birds chirping, and like an echoey scream. Like, it sounds like music just made through sound effects. Yeah, I'm very torn on this film. It definitely did not need to be 2.5 hours long. Uh, the Revenge, this was probably one of the weakest, like, sequences of revenge out of the entire series. I mean, yeah, the reboot series kind of went a little too into Saw territory, save for the third film. I would say those were pretty good, rapist, revenge, death scenes. But this one, you really, I mean, a guy got a scythe in the back, then shot in the head. One guy bled out through the groin, same way as Johnny, only not nearly as impactful or intense or memorable. In fact, you're actually glad it happened because the guy's more annoying than anything. Another guy gets shot in the groin, but then shot up his ass and out his head. And then Becky just gets beaten, and then a bottle busted over her head. And then the two grandmothers just get killed with a shovel. So, not very impactful revenge scenes. Not quite sure how I feel about Jennifer Hills being killed off the way she was, because she was, she was decapitated. And Becky even holds her head up in front of the church, like, give you the head of Jennifer Hills. Like the angel of death, or the messenger of Satan, or whatever they call her. I mean, it is kind of cool that the original writer-director, after all this time, 40 years, does come back to do a direct sequel. Again, with only, I think, one movie to his credits. And that was sometime in the 80s. And, I mean, I guess with the title Deja Vu, maybe it was supposed to have a lot of the same stuff. I thought it just meant that they're going to be dealing with the same kind of people in the same place, like the family members. But it is literally like the scene with Kevin, stabbed in the groin, bleeding out, says the exact same dialogue, just runs around screaming. And the other thing that was really painful was the over-the-top acting. Again, I don't know if they're just trying to be caricatures of backwoods hicks, or a mixture of that and also just kind of playing off the idea of just bad, over-the-top exploitation grindhouse acting for the 70s. Could be either, or it could just be weird direction that the actors had. But yeah, I'm definitely the most torn on this film. I mean, it had some cool camera angles. It did have good cinematography. It had a similar realistic look to it, like the original. Of course, the original was way more effective in its gritty, grainy, or being gritty and grainy, but also voyeuristic. But you can definitely tell it's the same writer director in this film as the original, but where the original was so straightforward and just so straight to the point, and this had so much else going on with it. Yeah, I'm pretty torn on how I feel, but anyway. So that's it for my reviews of the I Spit on Your Grave series. I wish this review was a bit more conclusive, but the parts I liked I thought were decent, but the parts I didn't like I really did struggle with. And apparently Meters Archie did announce shortly, I think at the premiere or shortly after the premiere, that he plans on another sequel. So we'll see where that goes. But for now, this is the last one. Done with I Spit on Your Grave, and thank you for watching.